Hello and welcome to lecture 7. This is the first of 2 lectures in week 5 and they're both pretty much about questionnaires, about designing questionnaires and thinking about measurement and how you use questionnaires to measure things. I think probably it'll be quite useful for you when you're thinking about your assessment too. It's probably worth having a listen to. These are both relatively short lectures, so hopefully it won't take too long. All right, okay, so in this lecture we're going to talk about understanding measurement and scales and using scales to measure things through questionnaires. The reading for this is the textbook chapter 8 and yeah, you are not being tested on chapter 8 but it might be useful for you to use the information in chapter 8 to think about how you're going to design your questionnaire in assessment 2. Right, okay, so where we are, we're in the 11 steps of marketing research as described by the textbook. We're sitting at about step 7, which is design data collection forms. There's lots of different types of data collection forms, but probably in marketing research, 2 of the most common ones used are questionnaires and observation forms. Listed Qualtrics, SurveyMonkey and Google Forms. They're really popular electronic survey programs and they can help you quite a lot because they actually use a lot of preset questions and so forth to help you come up with the best way to ask questions. But on the other hand, it's really important for you to understand all the different types of measurement and question styles available to you in a questionnaire. So you can actually do a good job of coming up with the best ones to answer the research objectives you have. Okay, so what is measurement? Measurement is a value that shows the size or amount of something. It's pretty self-explanatory. In marketing research, it measures properties of objects and people. Properties are features or characteristics of an object that distinguish it from another thing. So in particular, marketing research measures difference and measures differences in properties or how people perceive properties. So objective properties are physically verifiable. So you can have a 3-legged stool and a 4-legged stool, and that's physically different. And you can see that they're both stools, but they have different properties. Subjective properties are how you might perceive an object to be. So you may, for example, have a beach and I might like the beach because I went to the beach as a child and had wonderful experiences on the beach and barbecues and so forth. And another person might see the exact same beach and have very different feelings based on maybe a near drowning experience or getting lost as a child or whatever. So there's a huge complexity around subjective properties on what people perceive properties to be and whether they perceive them favourably or not in an object. Okay, and that obviously is quite a tricky one to measure and is quite often measured qualitatively as we discussed last week. Okay, so measurement in marketing research. This comes straight out of the textbook on page 204. The object, so it can be a person, product, brand or company. You measure the properties. So properties of any of those things could be age, gender, preferred brand or opinion. So they're different types of properties and they have both can be both subjective or objective. In age, for example, you could say I am 32, or you could say I am fairly young or fairly old, depending on where you're from. It's very subjective. So they're both objective and subjective properties. The measurement process, so this is just giving you some indication of the types of measurement processes and then results that you can get with some very common questions that you would ask in marketing research. So for age, you ask how old you are. Measurement result, 35 years. Gender, what is your gender? Male, female, female. What is your favourite brand? Coke, Pepsi, Dr. Pepper? Pepsi. So you select one of those and that's the measurement result. How good How do you rate our brand? Poor, fair, good, or excellent? So we're going to talk about how you break down some of these things and how you think about measuring them. Okay, so there's different measurement scales. I'll just move my face for a second so you can see. Okay, so we have my market research methods. So this can explain what's on this slide a little more, and also types of data. So there's a couple of different links there. If you're interested, you can have a look at those, and if you want to know more about these. Okay, so measurement scales are ways to categorise different types of variables. Okay, so there's 4 main types of data when you're thinking about measuring things. And I'll discuss these each in a separate slide, but essentially this is a summary slide for you. Nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio. Okay, so nominal is named. It's a label for a category that bears no relationship to the other categories. For example, type of fruit or hair colour. It's just the name of that category. Ordinal is ordered. So the variables are in fact in order, but the difference between them is not known. So very happy, happy, unhappy, or very unhappy, you don't necessarily know the difference, the distance between very happy and happy. Having said that, your textbook says that that is actually an interval scale, and that's actually under dispute. Some people say it is and some people say it isn't. It's my job as your lecturer to give you that information so you know you're not going out in the world thinking you know everything. This is actually not 100% agreed on, but in the marketing research world, a lot of people like to use those scales as interval scales because it helps with their measurement. Okay, interval data is ordered and it has standard intervals. Okay, so variables are in order and the difference between them is standard, but they have no absolute zero. For example, temperature. 0 is still a measurement. You can go negative. There's no absolute 0. You know, -5 is still a temperature. It's not the end of the scale at 0. And the difference between -5 and -4 is the same as the difference between 25 and 26 degrees. It's 1 degree, which is a measured amount. Okay, and ratio, okay, so that's ordered plus standard intervals and an absolute 0. Okay, so it's getting more and more complicated, but also easier to measure. An absolute 0, if you weigh nothing, you weigh nothing. You don't weigh negative, so 0 kilograms is your weight. There is an exact amount between each unit, so there's the same difference between 10 and 11 kilograms as there is between 110 and 111 kilograms. And it all comes back to 0, which means they are all a measured distance away from 1 point, which makes them easier to measure. All right, okay, now I'm going to go and repeat myself by talking about this a little more. Okay, so nominal, named. I don't know why, but I had a third apple there. Yeah, thank you. All right, so named, a label for a category that bears no relationship to the other categories. So what's your favourite fruit? Apple, orange, pear. What is your gender? Male, female. And this, do you like fruit? Yes, no. Okay, they're all named categories. There's no relationship between the categories. Okay, some examples of ordinal. All right, I've put here Likert scale. Is it ordinal or interval? And that's just to make you think about that. That's what I was just mentioning before. All right, so ordinal is ordered. Variables are in order, but the difference between them is not known. So examples of nominal scales are how would you rate your apple eating experience today? Fantastic, good, reasonable, poor, or terrible. Now, some people say that that is an ordinal scale, but as you maybe put it on a scale of 1 to 10, you're more inclined to have more accurate measurements between 1 to 2 and 2 to 3 and 3 to 4. So it's more likely if you have more points on the scale to become interval. So anyway, that's just something to think about. Okay, so rank these. So another ordered way is rank these fruit first, second or third in your order of preference. Or how do you feel today? So sad is on the bottom side of okay and happy is on the upside of okay. So they relate to one another. The apple, orange and pear are nominal and they don't relate to each other, but as you rank them, you are making them relate to each other. It's a really tricky one. Right, interval. Okay, so this is ordered and it has standard intervals. That means standard spaces between each number on the scale. Okay, so variables are in order and the difference between them is standard, but they have no absolute zero. Not everyone agrees on whether Likert scales. As I say, interval, oh, that's not very good English. I'm not sure what I wrote there. Not everyone agrees on whether they're being interval or ordinal, but I hope you know what I mean. More points on the scale can make it closer to interval for measurement and more acceptable in a scientific way. In the end, when you're doing marketing research, it's no big deal. Usually you've got a reasonable idea and you can use a 5-point Likert scale as an interval scale. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your apple eating experience today? You can go from terrible to reasonable to fantastic. So that's on a numerical scale. On a scale of 1 to 5, how much do you like or dislike apples? So that's a standard Likert scale, L-I-K-E-R-T, okay? And what was the temperature when you ate your apple? Okay, so that's a temperature. So then you know what temperature do you prefer to eat apples? Okie dokie. Okay, ratio. So this is the most technical and it's quite useful, however, in terms of actually measuring things and getting some accurate measurements to compare and contrast things. Okay, so you have an absolute zero in ratio scales. Okay, they're in order and the difference between them is standard and they have an absolute zero. Okay, dollars, market share, scale, sales, age, number of people in the household. You have an absolute zero if there's no one who lives in the household, so that is a zero. Okay, so how many apples have you eaten this week? If you've eaten none, you've eaten none. You can't eat negative apples. How much do you spend on apples each week? You don't spend negative dollars on apples. And please indicate your age. Okay, so 0 is 0. You're born, you're born. There is an absolute zero that we can measure from that point out to all the other points. Right. Oh, and there's my apple again. Excellent. I thought it was there. Okay, so this is essentially the purpose of this lecture. So is to introduce the idea of nominal, ordinal, interval and ratio. You may have already come across this in maths at school. I'm pretty sure that they talk about it a lot, but it's really important to make sure that you're fully across it and it can help you with your analysis techniques later, especially when you're thinking about SPSS. Okay, so right, typical, this is really quite a useful table. Okay, so nominal can give you a determination of equality. It has a number system, so you have a unique definition of numerals, and that when you're thinking in SPSS, you would, if you had apples, oranges, bananas and pears, apple would be 1, oranges would be 2, bananas would be pears, would be 3, not pears, and pears would be 4. So you just arbitrarily give them a number and that can help with your analysis later. They don't have to be in any particular order. Okay, so the marketing phenomena that you're measuring is you have classification. Okay, so you can classify brands, male, female, store types, sale territories, purchase and non-purchase. I think that's pretty self-explanatory, I hope. Typical statistics, you use descriptive statistics, you just use percentages and mode. This is the most popular. Mode is the most popular in category in your group. Okay, you can't use averages or anything like that because that indicates some sort of scale. So it's just the most popular, or least popular, or whatever. Inferential, so chi-square and binomial tests. We'll talk more about this when we're thinking about SPSS. Okay, ordinal. Okay, ordinal gives you a determination of greater or less. You have an order of numerals, so everything has to be from 1 to an endpoint, or 0 to an endpoint, or in fact negative to an endpoint, thinking about it, because it doesn't have an absolute 0. Okay. The rankings are preferences for brands, attitude measures, market position and occupation. The marketing phenomena are rankings, that's what it measures. Okay, the median is something that you can use in descriptive statistics in ordinal, so that's what occurs somewhere in the middle. what occurs in the middle when you've got all of them listed out, what comes out in the middle. And you can use mode for that as well. Friedman, two-way ANOVA, rank order correlation, and Mann-Whitney U. I'm not going to talk about those today. They're all part of different type of statistical analysis tests that you can learn in SPSS. And I don't actually think we're going to get to a point of even discussing a lot of those in SPSS. So there's not a huge need, but if there's something that you want to pursue, that's useful information for you. Okay, interval, determination of equality of intervals. Okay, so equality of differences between them. So 2 minus 1 equals 7 minus 6, which is true. They both equal 1. Okay, the marketing phenomena that you look at when you're using interval is attitude measures, level of knowledge about brands, index numbers and temperature scales. Typical descriptive statistics are mean, range and standard deviation. I won't talk about the inferential stuff. Again, it might sound a bit confusing. It's different types of analysis tests that you use to assess interval data. Okay, ratio. Okay, is the determination of the equality of ratios. The equality of, so you can actually go 2 divided by 4 and 4 equals 4 divided by 8. So you can actually start thinking about understanding that they're all the same distance from zero, that we can measure their distance from zero, from an absolute point. Okay, the marketing phenomena that you can use is sales, units per dollars, number of customers and costs. Okay, there's not a lot of descriptive statistics that you use, and the inferential ones are coefficient of variation is probably the most common one, and we may talk a little bit about that when we're talking about SPSS. Hopefully that is not too confusing. All right, okay, so commonly used scales, I'm moving the flags again, commonly used scales. Okay, so Likert scale, the most popular, everyone uses this and it's a good one to use. It's really useful, it's very versatile in terms of what you can do for your analysis. It can give you lots of really interesting information. You can use it to cross-reference across other kinds of data that you're getting. So for example, if you've recorded males and females and you've recorded who likes the colour pink more, you can actually reference, okay, males like the colour pink more than females do. So you can actually use a cross tabular analysis with those things, which is really handy. They're usually 5 to 10 points. They can be used as an interval, but some consider ordinal. I've said it 16 times now, so I probably made it in there. Okay, it's commonly used for phrasing for continuum scales. So also there is commonly used phrasing for continuum scales, and you have a look in the book about that. There's actually sort of standard sort of things, you know, strongly agree, disagree, strongly disagree, you know, neutral. There's some commonly used phrases for those categories that are quite useful to use, and so have a look in the book for those. Use more numeric points for better analytical accuracy. Useful to use 1 as the lowest or most negative point, so the rating can be used for analysis. So if you have 1 and 1 as your minimum and 5 as your maximum, it's quite useful that you strongly disagree or your most dislike or your most negative factor is actually 1 and your most positive factor is 5, because then you can give it some kind of rating out of 5. You can actually say it was an average of 3.6. So 3.6 out of 5 gives you a little bit of a rating, and it can help you mentally figure out, okay, so males, you know, males on average prefer blue to pink, for example, because the average for males for blue was 4.5 and the average for males for pink was 1.2, something like that. This gives you a little bit of a grounds for comparison. It's particularly useful for a lifestyle inventory. Okay, so they're people's unique activities, interests and opinions. So a lifestyle inventory is one way that a lot of, and you've probably heard some statements like this, my children's interests are my top priority. So they're trying to get you to establish the type of person you are and your opinions and interests and activities, what you like to do. You know, I like to exercise on the weekends. I like to clean on the weekends. It actually helps you build an image of what a person's unique AIO is, and that gives you a sort of an idea of the lifestyle inventory, so you can build up an idea of what people's lifestyles are. Okay. Okay, semantic differential. Okay, so this is a series of bipolar descriptors for the study object. All right, sounds technical, but essentially it's like high and low. Yep, so it's a scale. I'd have to say this is, probably we'd use this as an interval scale. Low quality, because people would probably, yeah, it's a perception thing that there's a similar difference between each one of those points, and that differs across different people. So technically it's probably actually ordinal, but you probably could use it for analysis in an interval scale. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so high prices on one end, low prices on the other, tick where you think this falls. Low quality food, high quality food, tick where you think this falls. You can plot these against a range of different products to see where the points of difference lie. And you can actually, if you do this for a whole bunch, where you have all the positives down one side and all the negatives down the other side, you can actually plot them, and it puts it, and if you plot them with different colours for the different businesses, for example, that you're actually comparing, what you can see is critical points. So this one, you know, they follow the same line, but then one jags way out to the right because it's got higher quality food. So this one jags right out to the left because it's got its prices are too high, something like that. So it gives you an opportunity to actually sort of compare things. It's quite cool. Avoid halo effect, where people rate high because of a commitment to the brand rather than the product itself. And there's one thing that you know, you can sometimes people rate Apple highly, for example, because they're committed to the brand, even though maybe that the experience hasn't been that positive, because they like the concept of the brand and what it says about them. So that's just something to be mindful of when you're thinking about semantic differentials. The staple scale, so this is positive and negative. Okay, so if you're thinking about this doesn't have an absolute zero. This is probably going to be an ordinal or interval scale. So, you know, friendly staff are in the middle, and you can go, yes, they're particularly friendly, or they're actually negative friendly. All right, symmetric and non-symmetric scales. Okay, so most Likert scales are symmetrical, and that's really quite useful. So there's sort of like an equal number of good points and an equal number of bad points. A non-symmetric scale has often more degrees of positive, or could have more degrees of negative, depending on what you're measuring. Like I've used the example in here of the Esplanade Lagoon in Cairns. We don't want to waste 3 points on our scale to ask, you know, for people to say that they don't like it, because I reckon about 3 people out of every 100 would say they don't like it. So we might want a longer scale on the positive side for that. All right, final slide. Okay, reliability. Okay, so you need to, sometimes you can ask the same question in different ways to make sure that you have reliability, that people are answering the question reliably. And I'm trying to think of a good example. I'm thinking about the fruit eating example, something like I eat fruit on Wednesdays, and then later on, you know, I never eat fruit. Okay, so you can see that there's something not quite right there, because if they say they eat fruit on Wednesdays, but then they say they never eat fruit, it says that maybe it's not that reliable. So there's often these little reliability questions within surveys to try and not trick people, but just make sure that people are actually answering reliably. Validity, okay, is the accuracy of the measurement, and we'll talk a bit about validity when we're talking about data analysis. Face validity is the degree to which the question measures what it is trying to measure, and that's probably the most important thing. Does it actually measure what you're asking it to? All right, so I think that's the end of my, oh, yep, it is. All right, thanks very much.